Hello everyone, and welcome to the next episode in our Elkhart County History series. And today we are exploring Paleo people, the first people to inhabit Elkhart County and North America. So we have a great slate of things we're going to learn about today. First, we're going to head into the museum and our exhibits and learn about how these people got here, where they came from, how they got here, and why were they coming to North America. After that, we're going to head into our lab again and investigate how these people made a bunch of tools by hand, the tools they used and the process they used. And then finally, we're going to show you how to use an Atlatl, a hunting tool developed by these people 10,000 years ago, a hunting tool that still gets used today. So we have a great video today, so let's head on into the museum and explore how these people got here. All right, so now we're in our museum exhibits, and this map here helps us to explain how Paleo people got to North America and specifically Elkhart County. So just to give you some perspective where Elkhart County is on this map, we're right about here. And then you see what is North America today covered in ground and land, and all this white section at one time was covered by the glaciers during the end of the last ice age. And these Paleo people came here from thousands of miles away. It took them years and years and decades to get here. And there's three theories that we believe that they got here. Now, no one's been able to prove any of these theories definitively. There's evidence that suggests that all three of these theories have some proof to them. But how people specifically got to Elkhart County, we don't know. So there's some investigation still. So we're not quite sure, but these are three theories that people who have studied Paleo people have told us how we believe that they got here. So the first theory is through walking from Asia across the Bering Land Bridge into North America. So as you can see up here at one time, and you can see just for perspective, this is Alaska today. You can see that at one time, Alaska and Asia were connected by land through what is now the Bering Strait, but it was called the Bering Land Bridge. And if you follow these blue arrows, what they would do is the Paleo people would walk here, they came through, there was a really small corridor and an opening in between the glaciers. So these people literally walked in between glaciers all the way down and came into the interior of North America, and then they spread out. So imagine how long that would take. Imagine the conditions these people had to walk in, how cold it would have been, what the weather was like, and they struggled to survive, and they kept moving and kept moving and kept moving until they found an environment that was good for them. Now there's another theory that comes from Asia as well, and it's not through the Paleo people walking, it's through them constructing ships. So you can see here this black arrow that they would have built ships in what is today where China and Japan are, and they would follow the land. They didn't go straight across the ocean, they would have followed the outlines of the land. They would have came up north, they would have followed all the way down through the western coast of North America. They would have landed, we believe, somewhere kind of where present-day Washington and Oregon are. Some of them continued further down into what is today Mexico, and then later into South America. So they came by ships through this theory. And then the third theory, I'm going to move over here so you can see, is they came by way of ship through Europe. They island hopped across the Atlantic Ocean. So much like the people from Asia building ships and following the land, the same thing happened over here. So you can see these dotted lines here. They would have gone from north, would have left Europe, would have followed north throughout the island hop, and went from island to island to island, today probably what is Iceland and Greenland. They made their way down through the eastern shore of present-day Canada. They landed kind of where the New England states were. Some went further down, some went into the Gulf of Mexico and made their way in. Some continued even further down as well. So there's a number of different theories. Which one is true? Maybe all of them, maybe none of them. Maybe there's a new theory. This is something we don't quite know yet, and there's more evidence to suggest each theory. So what we say here at the museum is we're not sure how the original first Paleo people came to Elkhart County, but we believe it's one of these three ways. Now, why were they coming here? Mostly for food. They were following megafauna like woolly mammoths and mastodons, And as those animals moved, those people would follow them, because not only is it their food source, but it's also what they use for clothing, it's what they use for tools, that's what they use for a number of different things, everything they needed to survive. Now, what we're going to do next, now that we've talked about how we believe people got here, is talk about how smart these people were. Because we have this belief today that we call them cavemen, but Paleo people were extremely intelligent. They made a number of different innovations. They built their own tools. And we're going to talk about how they would have developed those tools when we head into the lab. So if you follow me, let's head into the lab. All right, everyone, now we're here in the lab and we're talking about Paleo Innovations. So Paleo people are extremely inventive, extremely innovative, and they had to be, because they had to develop and make tools that they needed to survive. Think about all the things we need for basic survival today, and we can just get them at the store, a lot of those things. These people didn't have a store. They had to make these things themselves. And one particular process that we're going to talk about today is called flint knapping. So what Paleo people did was basically take big chunks of rock like this and turn them into points, or a number of different tools, but we're talking about points specifically today. So the way they did that first is they had to use a tool called a hammerstone. And we have some examples of hammerstones used by Paleo people. So we know that this was used as a hammerstone because of the wear mark. So if you look closely here, kind of this circle, if you look at this part, this rock where it's discolored, that was where a Paleo person handled this hammerstone. And if we turn it over on its side, you can see the discoloration marks there. Those are the wear marks. So basically how it would work is a Paleo person held it in their hand like this, and because it's a hammerstone, they used it just like how we would use a hammer today, except they didn't have a handle. So when they were using this to form their tools, first thing that they needed was something to make the tools out of. And they had to use natural resources. So they would find a rock that's kind of like this, nice and big, kind of their blank canvas. And what they would do is basically hammer this and pound it. And as they would hit this rock, parts would start to break off, and they would use this hammer and keep hammering and hammering until they formed a kind of a rough shape. So they'd hammer this into a rough shape, whether it's a long piece of rock for something like a knife, or a short thing for points, or whatever tool that they needed. So they would hammer this and hammer this and hammer this until they got the shape that they wanted. And then what they would do is use other tools to make kind of those fine techniques and fine points that they needed for a specific tool. So if they were making a point like this, whether it's used on the end of a spear or a dart, or if they were using this to scrape with, and that's why we call them points. A lot of people call these arrowheads, but very few of these, especially if they're Paleo, they weren't used for arrows. They weren't using bow and arrows, the Paleo people. They were using other things, which we'll talk about later in the video. But any type of tool that they needed a sharp edge for, what they would use is an antler or a piece of bone. So the way they would sharpen these edges is they would have their rough shape, and then they would scrape these edges. So they would take the antler or the bone and they would scrape just like this. And as they would do that, that would sharpen the rock. They work all the way around, turn it over again, and keep doing that till it made the sharpness and the fineness that the Paleo people wanted. And then their end result is they'd have points like this, or points like these, or any other type of tool. So say, for example, they were using a mammoth skin for clothing. They need to scrape that fur off. They could use a point like this and just basically use it to scrape it off to form their clothing. Now, the Paleo people developed flint knapping, but they weren't the only society to use this. Flint knapping has been used for thousands of years. To give you an example, the next society is the Archaic people that lived hundreds of years after Paleo people. They used this very same process to make axes. So we have an axe here that was used by flint knapping. So they would use these, and then when they would attach handles to this, and you can see how it's rounded out here, this is where the handle would go. And they use it just like we use axes today to build houses and dwellings and lots of other things. Anything they needed to chop down a tree, this is what they used. So it looks just like an axe today. So you can see through time how all these societies, most importantly Paleo people, are extremely inventive. So I'll put this back down here. So flint knapping is a process that has been used for thousands of years, developed by these Paleo people. Now, we talked about these points here, and sometimes they would be used for hunting. These would be put on the tip of spears or darts, And what we're going to talk about next is we're going to head out of the lab. We're going to head into our gym, our auditorium, where there's a big open space, and we're going to have a really fun activity. We're going to talk about Atlatls, another tool developed by Paleo people thousands of years ago. So let's go. All right, everyone. Now we've moved out of the lab into our auditorium, which will shortly become our archery or Atlatl range. So as you can see here, we have our target, which was a mammoth, which was a major food source for Paleo people. And Paleo people, to hunt these animals, had to develop another very important tool that was used for thousands and thousands of years. It is actually still used today. And what I'm referring to is an Atlatl. So it's a pretty simple tool, as you can see. It's basically just a wooden stick that has bone or antler as a handle. And then here at the other end, another bone or antler that has this really, really important tip that they call a spur. So how this was used is basically it's used to throw a spear. We're going to show you how we use these in a few moments, but basically think about this as making your arm longer. And if your arm's longer, the Paleo people, and even yourself, if you do this today, can throw a spear further and faster than you could just by using your hands. Think about the Olympic sport when they throw a javelin. That was how Paleo people were hunting prior to developing an Atlatl. By developing this Atlatl and using this tool to throw their spears, it was science, and they can move these spears much further, which scientists believe that they could throw a spear using Atlatl over the length of a football field, and they could throw a spear much faster. And some studies say that they could throw a spear easily over 100 miles an hour using an Atlatl. When you think about that, those spears needed to move that fast because they had to penetrate all that really thick fur and layers of fat to penetrate the skin and hit some vital organs or things like that on megafauna to kill it, and then they could use it for their food source, their clothing source, their dwellings, tools, all those different types of things. So the Atlatl was a very important innovation. So what we're going to show you now is we're going to move this target a little bit further down. We're going to get a reproduction Atlatl, one that we use today, and we'll show you how we actually can throw a spear using an Atlatl. So it's going to be really fun. So let's move this thing down there and let's get to it. All right, so we've moved our mammoth down range in our makeshift field here. So now I've switched out the Atlatl that we use in our exhibit, and now I have a modern reproduction Atlatl that we actually use in our field trips and programs. And it looks similar, it's made up the same way. So we have the handle here, we have a wooden shaft, and we have a spur, that contact point, which is really the most important part of the Atlatl. I have a dart here, and at the end of the dart, you might be able to see it. If not, that's okay. But this part here is hollowed out, and that's the contact point between the end of this dart and the Atlatl spur. So what you do is you take that spur and you make that connection right in there, just like this. And this sits right up there. I'm going to hold it with my index and thumb, and now we're ready to shoot. So this works just like how we throw football or how we throw baseball. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to use my right hand. So I'm going to take a step back, and I'm going to see if I can hit that mammoth. No guarantees. I'm not the perfect Atlatl thrower, but we're going to see how it goes. So I'm going to take a step back and see how it works. That has never happened. That was the first take. I want you to be aware of that. That's the first take. I hit it for the first time. That's never happened. So that is making this video. So, but anyway, that is how an Atlatl works. That's how people were able to hunt these megafauna and able to survive and make it through the Paleo period. And really, we wanted to show you how Paleo people were extremely inventive, and hopefully you've learned some about our great ancestors way back in history. So we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Elkhart County History, and keep watching our YouTube page for new videos that we're going to put up frequently. So thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again.